So let's talk about North Carolina and forced sterilizations. Okay. Now, as I was doing my research, as I was looking into eugenics and forced sterilizations in the United States of America, almost everything I read gave a hint of at least we're not North Carolina. Every state, every program, every law gave that sense of at least we're not North Carolina. So I said, Self, you should probably go and see what was wrong with North Carolina, aside from the fact that, like all the other states, they too participated in forced sterilizations. Yeah. North Carolina had one of the worst forced sterilization programs in the country. In fact, they were number 3. Okay. I believe California was number 1. We'll be talking about California. I can't remember who number 2 was. I'll look that up and I'll let y'all know. But California was number 1 and North Carolina was number 3. Okay. Sterilizations started in 1929 with the passage of the sterilization law, and it continued through 1973 when the last recorded sterilization is known to have been reported. But we're all realists, right? We're all realists. We know that forced sterilizations continued on past 1973. Yes, even in North Carolina. Yeah. Over 8,000 sterilizations were approved by the Eugenics Board of North Carolina. Women represented approximately 85% of those sterilized. Okay. Now, Black women made up 39% of those sterilized. Okay. Fun fact. By the late 1960s, Black women made up 60% of those sterilized, even though Black women only made up a quarter of the population. You heard correctly. Even though they made up a quarter of the population, Black women made up 60% of those who were forcibly sterilized. Eugenics programs, forced sterilizations were very, very popular, right? I think we talked about that. But they died down after World War II because everybody saw what eugenics and forced sterilizations led to, right? The Nazis were big proponents of both, and they used them as justifications and tools for the Holocaust, right? Right. So everybody backs away from them, except for a handful of states in the United States of America, North Carolina being one of them. Yeah, North Carolina doubled down. Yeah. After World War II, North Carolina's sterilizations accelerated, and they peaked in the 2 years between 1950 and 1952. Okay. Now, one of the reasons for the acceleration is that the state had given social workers the authority to submit petitions for sterilization. Okay. This new policy led to an increase in the number of non-institutionalized people who were sterilized. Previously, sterilization had been restricted to institutionalized individuals. Okay. Now, let's talk about who was targeted. Okay. Now, in the beginning, eugenics programs and sterilization programs, they targeted the mentally challenged. They targeted those with mental or physical disabilities. Okay. Over time, that changed. Okay. In the beginning, it applied to women and men. Okay. Although in most states, North Carolina included, women made up a larger portion of those being sterilized. Okay. Over time, again, that changed. Okay. Now, about 85% of all of those sterilized in North Carolina were women. Between 1929 and 1947, 50% of sterilized women were under the age of 20. Okay? Now, you have to remember that there is a strong history in the South of supporting the idea of controlling the reproductive rights of women and Black people. You know, a lot like it is today. Yeah, yeah. So that helped the target shift from those who were mentally or physically challenged to women, especially younger women. Okay? Especially younger women who were considered sexually promiscuous or sexually deviant, women who were mentally or intellectually challenged. Of course, Black. Okay? All of them were susceptible to being forcibly sterilized. Okay? The number of Black women being sterilized rose as well. Okay? The percentage of Black women who were sterilized rose from 23% in the 1930s to 64% in the 1960s. Okay? Now, the rise in Black women's sterilizations it's simple. The reason for it is simple. The state began to focus on sterilizing Black women because they had become the majority of those on welfare. Okay? Black women were seen as highly uneducated, poor, and as having higher fertility rates than their white female counterparts. Okay? It was assumed that Black women had uncontrollable sexual behavior and racial stereotypes. You remember our discussion on stereotypes? What stereotype says that Black women have uncontrollable sexual behavior? I'm not going to tell you. Please remember your source material. Okay? Go back and look at our previous lessons. Okay? But because of that stereotype, and because they insist on mentally reinforcing it, Black women became an even larger target for forced sterilization. Okay? During the Civil Rights Movement, the social workers were still petitioning the state's eugenic board to sterilize Black women, so that by the later 1960s, 60% of those sterilized were young Black women. And this was all during the Civil Rights era.